Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Fuse Games Conference, a completely online and free conference from the Stafford University's Games Department. Our next guest is a freelance VFX artist who brings a wealth of experience from their time in the industry and through their mentorship roles. I'm also being co-host today is Jamie Nicholas, a lecturer at the university that focuses on delivering VFX curriculum. So I'd like to welcome both Ian and Jamie to the stream.
Hi guys.
So VFX, Ian,
Yes.
where did it start? Where do it begin? Where are we
So
now?
for myself, or
Yeah,
the industry in general.
I guess we could start with yourself and then move on to the industry in general.
Well, I started off in 3D illustration in the late 90s, and then in the early 2000s, I thought it was time to move on. And someone said I should apply for a job at the Moving Picture Company in 2003 as a lighting 2D. Back then, it's like anyone who knew Maya, who could hold a mouse, and you were hired essentially. So I went for interview, and they put me on the first movie, which was Troy, back in 2003, where I lit the city and set fire to it. So that was back then. Fast forward to now, I'm a fully fledged CG soup. I've worked on multiple projects. Most notably, the most recent film was Napoleon, which is in cinemas at the moment. I worked with a company called Light Visual Effects, supervising their team. If you do a search for Light and Napoleon on LinkedIn, you'll find the breakdowns of the work that I did recently.
So in getting going then, the first role, what made you decide that this was the right thing for me, or was it simply just landing into that sort of role?
Well, I mean, I was in a 3D environment already doing illustration. Wanted to break out into something moving away from still work. So I kind of put together a showreel for the company I was working with for them, and ended up using it as my showreel. And I ended up hiring a couple of animators on a project. And one of the animators is like, you should go apply to these guys. I said, I've never worked in there. And he goes, you'll be more than good enough. You'll be fine. And it wasn't wrong. I fitted in very well. It was very, back then we didn't have processes for everything. So it was all kind of very new. For example, on Harry Potter, Goblet of Fire, there was nothing to describe subsurface scattering in the rendering software. So my colleague had to invent it by using shadow maps and other jiggery-pokery. I got to do my first character back then, which was Nagini, which I did the title sequence, which was the longest shot until Sunshine came along. So that's from Nagini coming out of the skulls at the beginning of the film, all the way up to the title, and then back down again to the house, which is the first sort of minute or so of the film. I went into CG souping soon after that. The first one was The Golden Age with Shekhar Kapoor, who was a complete character. Got to meet him, work with him directly. And then other highlights, got to work with Ridley Scott on Kingdom of Heaven, which he drew me a sketch. I wish I held on to it. Another one recently, a bit fast and forward, got to work with Alan Rickman as well directly on his Little Bit of Chaos. He had to put a shot on the end of his film, a CG shot, and he didn't want to do it. It was very, but the production company said that we haven't got an establisher for the whole of Serres, which is the gardens, which was a feature of the film. You didn't have one which just showed the whole thing. And so I had to work with him. Well, I didn't have to, it was quite fun working with him, but talking through how it could be done. And by the end, we made good friends. And he took me to lunch, the longest lunch. I was very drunk at the end. It started at 1 and I finished at 5. So yeah, there's some highlights there. Big blockbusters. Got to work on Avatar in French store in London, which is kind of cool. James Cameron is a complete psychopath, but also very demanding. I mean, you can see the film; it did very well in the box office. And then yeah, so did a bit of everything really. Working with architects more recently, and then going back into film with Lights, doing some commercials for Super Bowl and obviously Napoleon. And now I'm here at Tata Motors in Coventry, helping them their CG department.
So you mentioned about starting off a portfolio for visual effects when you first started out, and it being sort of for them. Is that something typical that you still expect, or was it something of a mindset at the time, and has now sort of very much maybe deviated away from it being like that? What would you expect to see?
Well, when I was doing it, it was all very new. We didn't have anything like the color space or the technicals that are well established now and just taken for granted. It was all very, 8-bit files and it was all kind of, held together with sticky tape. Nowadays, you've got more render power on one graphics card in Unreal than we had in like an entire room of machines. So it's a very different world. So I guess what I look for in people who want to get into the industry is people who are self-taught mostly. Because if you're self-taught, then you're going to be able to handle the stresses of the job. You can't be a shrinking violet because we're pretty brutal. If your stuff doesn't look right, you're going to get told many times until you get it right. Because ultimately, the shot's got to look right at the end, and that's how we get there. We're very critical of each other's stuff, but not personally. It's about the stuff, about the work. And and if you've already displayed that, then you're going to be in a good place when you go into the industry. Um, but also, it's like the more time you get good at what you practice, essentially. So if you're like my mentoree, I mean, his bedroom wall is a green screen. So he doesn't play video games. He just does he does all sorts like Houdini and a little bit of After Effects and Nuke. So he's already signed up for all the free software you can get for the students, which is another thing you should have. Everyone should just go grab the software. It's completely free. You can get a free copy of Maya, free copy of Houdini, free copy of the renderers. Yeah, pretty much everything really. I think that, I'm not sure about Adobe. I think, but it's heavily discounted for Adobe. But yeah, no,
So
the
if you
software
were
and
to
If
begin
stuff
it's a big
going.
into
discount for Adobe, they can go and get the whole
Yeah,
suite, I believe. It's very
I
good.
mean Adobe. I mean using it here at Tata Adobe Suite, but we don't generally use it for the backbone of stuff in visual effects. It's more that'll be the Foundry. So excuse me, the Nuke from the Foundry is the background compositor. Maya used to be king for 3D. Now I think it's playing very much second fiddle to Houdini. The only thing that's left for Maya really is animation. The animators still love it. It's still very quick at doing keyframing and things like that. But anything post or in or out is generally not Maya anymore. It's normally Houdini. So that tells with your lighting, your rendering, your shading, and then obviously the obvious Houdini tools is like your effects, your explosions, your destruction. Because Houdini's workflow is just really good. The interface is second to none.
so when you're sort of starting out on making a scene, where do you have any sort of typical starting points? Is there anything that you want to get in early in terms of if you were planning out a scene? What is the starting process for you, Ian?
Well, if I was a student.
No, I mean in terms of your production methods, where do you begin?
Well, it normally begins with a cut. Well, it depends where you're on. So if it's a CG soup level, you generally get a script. Is where it starts, and that begins with you read the script obviously, and then the client will highlight what they want in particular scenes, and then from that you then make a whole bunch of guesswork as to how long that's going to take depending on which department, how much modeling time, how much shading time, how much texturing time. Then if it's a character, how much rigging time. Then character setup for character effects like cloth, muscles, hair. So you've got grooming involved. If there's any hair, which most creatures do, then there's a groom artist and they're combing that and shaping that. And then once you've done all of that, then it's got to be look depth, so you've got to put that time in as well. And we haven't even got it to move yet. Then it's got to be rigged, and then you've got to think about animation time per shot, and then you've got to think about how many versions until you think you're going to be there, and all that has to be costed. So once you've got a value for the shot, you do that to the remaining shots, and then you have an overall cost. And then generally the production will give some sort of overall kind of like contingency on top that they can use as their safety barrier, and then that will go off to the client along with more than one company. It's called the bidding process, and depending on not necessarily the cheapest one wins, it can be also based on whether or not the house that is putting the bid in has experience or can demonstrate that they can do the work.
So if you're sort of in a position of working for a company or starting up your own company, where are
Hmm.
the kind of places that VFX studios tend to go for the work then?
Um, I'm not sure if I understand the question. So visual effects studios are generally the vendor, so that's where the work goes to. I suppose if you're talking for myself, like when I was working with Light, I was a subcontractor. Essentially, I was an employee. So they'll get in touch with me just because, well, the owner of the company knew me from working with him on Avatar, and another chap I'm working with at the moment, I also work with him on Avatar, and so and the supervisor on that job, I work with a lip sync. So it's kind of like a little bit of nepotism going on, where at my point in my career, my experience, I, how can I put it? My reputation precedes me, shall I say?
Experience is
So
capital and all that.
yeah, in this regard, 20 plus years of battle hand, at doing stuff that a lot of people wince at. I'm a bit of a visual effects firefighter. So where people sort of get crushed, I come in and try and fix it. It happens quite a lot. It's hard. It's not an easy job.
So when you're talking about these sort of firefighting jobs that you have at times, which ones are more typical to be sent over to you, Ian?
It's generally when they've had an artist that says they can do something, and then they miss the first deadline, they miss the second deadline, and then the production's like, well, we've burnt half our time, we're not getting anywhere so fast, and they pull out, they pull the fire alarm, and that suddenly phones me, which is what happened recently. So, but
Does that happen more often than not, or
well, I mean, it seems to be my kind of forte. But no, I mean, on a normal running production, that's as an artist, but as a supervisor, I don't want any fire alarms. So I'll try and think ahead. From the supervisor's perspective, my choices are really picking. My job is to pick the right person for the right job, and then listen to my team because they're doing the work. They're at the coalface, so to listen to them closely, what they need, what their thoughts are on stuff. Because a lot of the best ideas comes from your team. I've just got to select them.
So
So
your team then, Ian, currently, what kind of size of a team are you working with?
I don't have a team at the moment.
Do you
Last
know?
team was on. No. I'm working as an artist at the moment, as a senior artist here at Tata, and they're CG, their visualization team. So I'm basically taking cars which are still being designed and putting them into animations and things. So it's a very relaxing kind of change of scenery in comparison to visual effects, which is much more kind of like late nights. So here, I start at 6:30 and finish at 3:30. So
what kind of timetable can people expect then in working in VFX? You mentioned there that your sort of working week is altered depending on what kind of work that you're going to be in. Is that something that is sort of reflected generally in the industry as an accepted practice, or is this something that's more sort of central to yourself?
Well, I think you get what you put in. You get out what you put in. The harder you work, the better you're going to get. It's a very, very much kind of like results-driven kind of industry. So, people who show aptitude to do something generally get promoted quite quickly, or given more of the same. But you don't get there by doing, it's not a 9 to 5 job. If you think it's a 9 to 5 job, go find something else, because it's not. Because you're going to be surrounded by people that don't see it that way either. So it's that passionate artist kind of situation where, they want, because once it's on the film and it's in the cinema, can't go back and change it. You can't go back and tweak that shade that you wanted to fix. And so you got to see what you can rest with in your mind. It's kind of like shots get pulled from my fingers. That's what happens for me. It's like, it's not done yet. It's not done yet. Unless it's right at the end, I'm like, I'm done. But Napoleon, oddly enough, we delivered 2 weeks early, which was unheard of. I've never been in a situation like that. But I mean, that just goes to speak to the teams at Light Visual Effects, who are phenomenal.
So you're talking about then about having things pulled away from you, and obviously working with deadlines is something that's going to happen in games, VFX, or film, or whatever you're working in. What is a typical turnaround, and what is one of the experiences that you might be able to share with us that has been the most sort of peculiar in terms of turnaround, but also with you saying there that things get pulled away from you. Is that something to expect?
Well, when I say pull, I mean I'm being interested in my vernacular. It's kind of like the time runs out, and you don't want to, you don't think it's finished, but they'll take it off you anyways.
What are the things
Because
that really? Oh, go on in.
Oh no, go.
One of the things that really jarred a few of my newer VFX students was that they were no longer the person who decided whether or not it was ready or not. It was, me and setting the
Yeah.
deadlines and sitting with them and going, yeah, that's fine. They were like, I want to do more work, and I'm like, nope, you've got more to do. Off you go.
Yeah,
It's
well,
a strange thing for them.
what I would is like none of the shots are mine. The director's very kindly allowed me to work on his movie. That's the way it's framed. So none of it is your property. None of it. It's just you're just lucky to have a go, to be involved. So that's the way you frame it, and it's a very very hierarchical setup as well. So you've got your CG suit who answers to the VFX, who answers to the director, or there's might be more tiers between there. So you've got your vendor VFX, and then he'll speak to the overall movie visual effects, which is the director, and then even the director's under the thumb of the producer. And that's the same with visual effects. The producer runs the show because they hold the money.
It's the same pipeline over in games.
Exactly
the
that,
same.
exactly the same thing. So we push back, and from my side, the artist side, you push back against production when they are a bit tyrannical, because they're there to ensure the baseline and profits, so that the company lives on and you have more work to go in the future and your salaries get paid. But at the same time, you don't want stuff to go out that's going to look bad to prospective clients in the future, and you've got your own in-house standard to keep. I mean, a lot of the time, the visual effects vendors' standards higher than the clients, because they have their own reputation to support as well. Reputations are hard to win and easy to lose.
So
So
in
that's
games,
it.
Ian, there's quite often things like sort of like style bibles and things like that,
Yes.
and rules and regulations as to what kind of level of product is able to be released. Is it similar within your work? And if so, what kind of things are usual to see?
Yeah. Generally, we'll have concepts of things, like if it's something really made up. Like, for example, Harry Potter 4, we had the first ever one duel between Voldemort and Harry. And no one had ever seen that before, so no one actually knew what that was going to look like. And so you flesh out some visuals, in Photoshop and stylizations and things that are quick, drawn. And then those get sort of whittled down to like some favorites, and then only then do you start doing the expensive development inside visual effects itself, because you're burning cash at a much more with the concept artists. It's like one maybe two salaries on it. You start getting into a full of visual effects for, you're talking maybe 10, 20 people working on it. The costs go up a lot. So you want to really go in with a very strong plan before you even lift the mouse. But sometimes, when you've got a big budget like X-Men 3, we had to do the look development of the Dark Phoenix's eyeballs. So one guy, compositor, I think it was 3 months, 560 versions, and they chose version 7. Yeah. Or another situation where you've got on Potter, you had the whole Womp and Willow, where the three characters are swinging around. So we had a modeler work for an entire year on doing digi doubles of Harry and Hermione and those three to photographic level, hair, nails, everything, so they could do a digi replace, where we swap out the real person for a CG double. And ultimately went with live action. So they went with the shots that they had in camera. We augmented them in comp, and then put them into the scenes. And they said, no, that'll work. You kept that. So all of those models, after a year's amount of work, went in the bin. Never saw the light of day. But the artist is like, well, I still get paid. They can't even use it in the next film because they'll be older and look different. So, you just want to make sure that you're not too precious. I mean, you want to care about what you're doing, but you don't want to be too precious. And just be willing to get your hands dirty when needed. If it's something that you don't know how to do, doesn't mean that you can't learn how to do it.
So there must be a fine line of that between that sort of caring about what you do and not treating it as a 9 to 5 to then also be in a position where you go, right, if it's not needed, it's going to be cut from what you're doing. How have you dealt with that in the past, presuming that you have done? And what sort of advice would you give to those that are new to the area or going to be for the
The most
future?
common situation is the edit of the film has changed and a shot is omitted. So then it's no longer in the film. otherwise known as an early final. Because the client still pays for it, I just move on to the next shot, and I don't have to go through the pain of doing the final 10%. So just, you brush yourself off and get on to the next thing, because there's not another shot to work on. So, I've had situations where that's happened like multiple times in a week, and you just have to shrug it off. Just not get too attached, because it's not just yourself. You're also working with a whole bunch of peers who are doing the same thing. So there's a lot of camaraderie in the room, when we're all doing in person, and we all got drunk together after work, and things like that. Not so much now with the remote stuff, but no, when I was working in Soho, it's like there was different pubs of different visual effects houses. Like the Ship was MPC, the George was Cine Site, the Hems was Double Negative. So,
I
we had
like the
quite a lot of
idea of a
rivalry.
Soho-based VFX turf war on pubs.
Oh
That's
yeah,
quite good.
we had situations where multiple, so again, Potter had so many firsts. So on Potter you've got the Hippogriff and you've got the werewolf having a fight. Well, the Hippogriff was Framestore, and the werewolf was NPC. So they were rendered separately at different companies, and they had to come together. So how do you do that?
That's awesome.
Well, so the way it worked is one house is chosen to be lead, who's going to basically do the first shot, the first character. So I think it was Framestore was given that because the Hippogriff was considered to be a little bit more complicated because of the feathers. So we didn't even have exchange formats really. So what happened was they would kind of choreograph it with some sort of basic stand-ins, and then essentially they would complete their shots all the way through to composite, so that it's the final frame, if you like. Then we'd essentially take that digital file and then comp our stuff inside it and work with them. So it was quite interesting having Framestore fight in PC on the big screen, which is how we saw it on the floor. So, but very exciting stuff. So that was quite notable. Another situation I was in was you had this was Avatar. So we had the Valkyrie, the big kind of shuttlecraft that they land in. It's called the Valkyrie.
Oh yes.
So half of it was done at Weta. The other half was done at ILM in the States, and I was working on the asset in Framestore in London. Now, I don't know if ILM had sent all the files, not sent all the files deliberately, or had Weta not had sent all their files. But all I knew is I had two different formats of texture maps and setups that didn't work together, were incomplete. And so I went to my supervisor, said, well, I've got half of these and half of that. And he just looked at me and he looked at the shadow and was like, well, can you do something with them? I said, well, I can make up something new. It won't look like anything else. And he thought, well, that's what we got to do. They're not going to send us anything else. I was like, okay. So I went and did some, got my Hubble Bubble potions out and sort of mixed these different textures together and came up with a look that I thought looked great. James Cameron thought so too, and he sent my version back to both companies for them to copy. So I got my payback from both of them. Give me that little turd sandwich to work with. So yeah, it was like a little grenade. Good luck, guys. So, but yeah, no, we set the look on that, and then it went from there. So, which was really cool.
So there's a question that's popped up, Ian, in the
Sure.
comments from the Arcadius. They've asked, you mentioned alarms to quickly deal with delivery. Do you feel pressure, or what is the work process if the alarm would not be your forte? Would you try to extend the deadline?
Right. So production's not they're old hats. It's not their first radio situation. So production generally have like artist deadlines and production deadlines. So there is always a margin somewhere, but generally speaking, you hold the artist to the key deadline because you always want that little bit of wiggle room. But the deadlines are pretty hard because that's where the money runs out. So generally people don't want to work for free, although we do. In the evenings, this class is additional free overtime. It's changing a lot now. I think, the last company, Light, they had a very strict policy of no one worked beyond 7 p.m. And if you did, you had to have permission. So they would sort of like be very draconian about that because they didn't want that kind of atmosphere, which was very, commendable. But that wasn't my experience at the Moving Picture Company in the early 2000s. It was very different. So the trick with the deadlines is just be very honest with your supervisor. So if you ask, first thing you can never say to a supervisor is no. Never say no, because that's not in the vernacular. What is in your vernacular is, that's very hard. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to achieve that in the time we've got. Are we able to get additional personnel, or it's going to cost a lot more money, or I'm going to need a lot bigger. I'm going to need a bigger boat, as in a bigger render farm. So this, you push it back and say this is what the costs are. But I've seen artists say no too many times and then disappear out of the production.
So you talked there a little bit about render farms, Ian, and
yes.
obviously there's new equipment now to be able to, as you mentioned earlier on, to be able to perhaps deal with some of the difficulties that were there prior. I remember way back when I was at university, we actually had access to a render farm then. And what kind of production methods have you seen sort of alter, and how are you adapting to that now personally in the work that you and your teams do?
I think one of the most notable technology kind of advancements for me was moving from CPU processing to GPU processing. There is only one renderer out, for GPU rendering that I can consider to be top dog right now, and that's Redshift. So if you're going to learn any renderer outside of Unreal, Redshift would be the first one to go for. It's cheaper than most, and it's fast. It's like what Arnold renders in hours, Redshift renders in minutes. The average render time for a 2K frame is about 10 minutes if it's taking a long time on a 5000 RTX card, which is like I think 24 gigs of RAM. But it absolutely flies along.
Oh, yeah, I remember times of waiting for 23 hours for just a one shot to realise that there was a light placed wrong, and then having to go back and just to make one small adjustment, and then
you forgot to render a step frame preview, mate. That's what your
yeah,
mistake
was. rookie error, eh?
So very much so. So to combat that, I had the similar situation. I was working on a TV show with Arnold, so it's expensive to render on. Time-wise, and so we came up with layout renders where we'd render this thing you were going to submit, but with aliasing of 0. So instead of waiting an hour for a frame, it was like a minute a frame, if that. So you got a complete playback of the whole shot before you rendered it that evening, and then you knew what you were going to get, and then you didn't even resubmit it. You just resubmitted the job, which all the files are already cached, already there, and you just changed one value from 0 to 8, and then go home, knowing that it's fine. One of those renders stopped us from getting £1 million fine on a TV show once because the composer was able to, with magic and glue, was able to process it up to what we could use in the shot in the TV show, and it actually went out. One of those renders went into the TV show. You can't tell. I can't tell. I don't know how he did it, but he did it.
So, I'll jump in and just ask a little bit of a question off piece. But is there a project or a franchise or a company that you haven't worked with that you'd really like to?
Good question. I mean, ILM would be, I guess, one of those. I got close to becoming one of their 3D trainers. I got to the final round of interviews, but they went for someone else. Who else? Not really interested in weather. Too far away. There is a little visual effects company in Barbados, who I know people who work there. That sounds like a good spot. I could probably do a bit of time there.
But not guess why.
Well, I used to have relations there. Like the grandmother of my wife's side lived there. She died a few years back. But yeah, I've been to Barbados quite a few times. No, not really. I mean, the places I like to work where the people are good. So like, Milk was exceptional. It had in my career. I think on many reasons. It's not just the people, but also the tool sets. Like if you've got a very disorganized company and they're using spreadsheets and that's their organization, you're in for fun. But with Light, everything was bespoke software. They have an internal software called Play that does everything. So it's reviews, it's the render farm, it's like it's incredible. Checking stuff. You can even check stuff in the cut that so you can look at your shot and see the shot surrounding it. You can change versions, and it was very, very. It's probably the best bit of production software I've ever used anywhere. And I pine for it on every other production I end up with. There's nothing on the shelf that does what that software did. And if I ever get asked to go back to Light, I'll be like, yes, please, just to get to use that software again, because it was being written in-house. So every month there'll be some feature improvement that would increase, that everyone would benefit from. So it was really, I think, I've worked in places where R&D is kind of like frowned upon because the bean counters don't see the return on it. But because Light was started by someone like myself, they know that R&D is the waterline that lifts everyone up. And if you've got happy artists, you're going to get better results. And if they're not sitting there doing stupid things, and they can get on with their stuff because the software is great and works, then your whole boat and machine runs really smoothly, and everyone can get on what they're doing, and you can finish at 7.
So what
it can be done.
That ethos is something that we try to push to the students here as well, because like you said near at the start, people who are self-taught tend to have that more like push and drive to create the things that they want to create. They don't have to be guided. They'll go and do it themselves. So if a student comes and goes, I've got this problem, I've gone, have you hit it with a stick for a few hours and seen what happens? That tends to be the guidance we give.
Well, I mean, I would say, to speak to that a little bit and say that almost everything I do, I've not done before. If that makes sense. Like, I'm doing something for a TV show, and I've done some of it, but I don't know how to do all of it yet. I'm learning on the fly, and I've been in the business over 20 years. So if you're starting out, get used to learning, because that's really important. You never stop. You never stop learning. The software is constantly evolving, constantly changing. I mean, I spent 15, 20 years in Maya to jump to Houdini. So, and that's like being a complete doofus idiot in software you don't know for 6 months while you try and find your feet is exactly where you need to be. And if you're not comfortable doing, again, wrong job.
We have it with Unreal, where they'll bring out something new like every year, and we'll start teaching it because it's like it's up to date. It does cool stuff. They've just brought out a new PCG generation system. It's only been out maybe a year or something, or at least in beta for a year or two. And it's like, we're going to teach it and we're going to figure it out.
Well, that's why you want something a little bit more grown up that doesn't evolve so fast, and like Houdini would be because I think Houdini's development is, they've still got legacy stuff in there from like version 1. So, if you've used Houdini version 18, version 20 is not very different. It just has more features and does more things, or is faster or better management. The biggest change for Houdini of late was them moving into USD, which I would strongly recommend learning. But also, with the advent of AI video, I would recommend that people also look into like more of their art and eye and discernment, and start rolling and moving stuff, AI into their work. More notably, like I had to create salt flats for a background. I had a crop of an image of a mountain range I wanted to use, and in Photoshop AI, I was able to extend it out for a completely 360, which was like, I was like, it's very cool. And even the join. So when I offset the image, so it, because it's got to go all the way around, right? So there's going to be a seam. So you just your box on the seam, generate, and you just got rid of the seam. Like, I mean, it was a bit soft and blurry. It wasn't like, final quality, but it was for a background that was going to be defocused anyways. So that saved me probably a morning's work. I did it in about 20 minutes. So leveraging AI for generating a content is something I would definitely suggest people get familiar with. So because that is coming up fast. So it's here at Tata doing the automotive stuff is a little bit insulated from that because they're very secretive. I can't even have my laptop upstairs in the main studio. I'd get fired on the spot. So, there's that. And I think, movies, the big houses, they're always going to have the same intellectual property, so they won't want necessarily stuff going out of sight. Having said that, though, I've worked on movies or projects where the rendering's happening in the cloud, so it's already off site. So it's a gray area that's changing. We all laughed at the first AI videos, but we're not laughing anymore. So,
where do you see it being used the most then, Ian, from your experiences so far?
Well, what it does is it puts visual effects and imagery in the hands of novices. You do not need to know my job and have 20 years of experience to make an effect anymore. You just need to know how to construct the words necessary to describe it. That's essentially what it is. Now, it's a bit hands off and not controlled. So again, but that will change, I think, you can, even if you take something that looks a bit ropey, you can get AI to then clean it up for you. So as long as you've got the composition right, how you want it, and then, it's like there's some really badly rendered face, AI is more than capable of taking that and making it look real. Or even taking it to a situation where you could shoot some actors or your friends, and then you can turn them into dinosaurs and it'll copy the animation off the person who's doing the performance. So it really, what it does is it puts the power back in the hands of creativity. And I think, movies have all seem to have the message in them at the moment, which isn't going down very well with the public. And so you're going to see smaller companies and smaller entities come up with completely stuff from grassroots, which are going to be done on a shoestring, but are going to be wildly popular. I think that's what's going to happen next. A friend of mine's working on a movie script at the same time right now, and we're really excited about all this AI stuff because we don't have to hire big teams. We can flesh out, test scenes without ever lifting a camera, which is really useful. Or even just being able to get all the speech in the script, recorded, so you can then, then you've got essentially an audiobook that you can then work to.
So do you think that's going to start limiting the amount of roles that are available at the lower end of the sort of?
It already is.
Ladder?
It already is. Yeah, like I'd say, like match move is almost is going to go away. So that's where we do digital cameras. I mean, AI is going to eat that for breakfast. DMP, digital map painting, that's in the hands of whoever wants to type the words in these days. There's still going to be there's still something nice about an artist's touch on things that AI hasn't got to yet. I mean, you get nice imagery, but it's a bit like the difference between looking at a painting and something which is come out the printer.
I always used to compare it from IKEA furniture to oak handmade furniture.
Yeah, a little bit like that, but it's starting to that oak effect on the IKEA stuff's looking more and more convincing.
Yeah,
they do some lovely
ultimately.
He says whilst most of his house has got IKEA furniture in it.
Who doesn't?
That's it. So,
no, I think it's something to keep an eye on.
Is it all doom and gloom though, in that respect? Because obviously we want to think about it in more positive light and what the possibilities are for us to be able to use it. Where are you seeing the most benefit?
Giving accessibility to people who don't have the experience. That's the crux. It's like you need to start rethinking stuff in regards to, like, it's more about discernment rather than doing the work yourself. So the people who can choose a better picture and be able to describe what works are going to be more successful than the people who just move the mouse around. So it's about working smarter and harder, really. Leverage it, make it your friend, and tame it, because it will eventually take over. I think the end game will be the director sitting in a room with a visual effects supervisor and a producer, and that'll be it. And it'll just be a big screen. They'll say, "Make the dinosaur bigger." No, smaller, more teeth. And eventually you'll get there. But it's kind of like, at the moment, it's like talking into a dream essentially right now. So I think it's kind of I thought it was 5 years away. I was 4 years out. So I think the next 3 or 4 years is going to be it's not a linear thing either. It's exponential. So it's accelerating right now. So we're starting to see the uptake, and it's not just the visual effects industry. It's anyone who deals with written words. Forget it. Lawyers, yeah, you're toast. All that stuff as well. That's coming up fast. So that puts lawyers and legal terms in the hands of people like ourselves.
So in that case, Ian, when it comes to the point of where you sort of mentioned a second ago, if there's only 3 people working on it, how are people going to get given the experience to become one of those 3 people in your?
Well, I think what it comes down to storytelling. And so, if you're a student, the first thing I would do is make friends with people who want to shoot films, because you're not going to necessarily replace the actors per se. So there's all that stuff to be done. I mean, I think that's part of what the writer's strike was about, and the actors joining in is because they didn't want the production houses to essentially take their image and use AI to put them into scenes without even paying them. So that's why we had a big strike in the summer. And I think that's been ironed out, that it's illegal for them to do so, because you know they would have done it if they could. Because you look at Disney and it's like, oh, it's all fairies and whatnot, but no, there's teeth on that Mickey Mouse. So, yeah, he's not a nice chap. Because they're there to make money. It's show business for a reason, you know. They're there to make money. So if they can do it cheaper and better, they will.
So, Ian, there's another question in the comments, again from the Arcadia. So, how do you deal with situations where if you make many iterations to the deadline, but then the client still does not like it?
Well, you're talking about a difficult client and iterations. So the way you deal with a difficult client like that is you don't do iterations, you do wedges. So wedge in, so you give the art, you make 10 versions quickly, and you ask them to pick 2, and then you make 10 versions based on those 2, and then you hone them down. So by the third wave, you've got them. The other way you deal with it is you introduce them to the very early stages. Case in point, when I was working on Golden Age, my visual effects supervisors didn't want to show the director anything except the final composite. And so it was 3 months turnaround, which meant that by the time the director saw it, there was no time to change it really, which meant that the shots were getting seized up at this point because he wanted to move a boat from the left hand of the screen to the right hand of the screen, but it's already got ropes and simulation that's been comped into the waves. Not going to work. So I convinced them that we had to show a layout stage and then animation and then sims, and so all grayscale stuff. So early and new, and say, right, Shaker, this is where you get to position all the boats. And he goes, right, move that one there, and put that one at the back. And so the artist would get up and go off and do that, and then 10 minutes later, we'd get a revision that would pop up on the screen. Is that good? And they go, yeah, layout approved. So then we ratchet the client through to the end. So layout approved, then animation approved, then simulation and effects approval. And so by the time he saw it in the comp at the end, he knew where all the boats were, he knew how they all moved, and so he's already ready, he's all primed to final it. So it's a mistake a lot of people do, is they hold back the work before it's ready. It's actually what you want to do is get it in front of them as soon as possible, depending on who you're working with. I mean, Shaker was a complete novice at doing visual, 3D stuff. But it's the supervisor's job to ensure that the communication is there. To say, right, this is where, it's very easy, right? They look like this because we're working quickly. Where do you want them? That's it. This is the only conversation. Do you want them further back? Do you want them nearer? Do you want them left? Do you want them right? How many do you want? And that's the conversation. So then it can happen within minutes and you get another version. So that's how you deal with that situation. So you don't want to be iterating to the end and then the client's not happy. Some of this also goes to the fact that maybe the client chose the wrong artist. So, it's like asking a bricklayer to do carpentry. That happens.
With that, Ian, I know that your time's quite precious today, so I wanted to get to a point of a last question for you, really.
Of course.
What then, as a student practicing VFX, trying to get into the industry, can they do to stand out above all others at the moment, in the eyes of yourself, in the eyes of those like yourself looking for people potentially to work on pieces of work?
Never stop learning. You want to work on your soft skills with people. You want to be a good communicator. Don't promise things you can't do. And accept the fact that you're not going to know what you're going to be doing at the beginning. The way I put it is this to people: at the beginning is really, really hard. The middle is really messy, but the ending is always great. Don't give up in the first 2 stages. It just means that you're doing it right. If it's hard and you're doing it wrong, you're learning how to do it not that way. It's like, the road to success is littered by failure. So just fail more often and you'll start getting it. That's the thing. It's like break the eggs. Don't be frightened of doing it wrong. In fact, doing it wrong is how you learn. If you do it right, it's the people who are naturally good at stuff tend to get all relaxed and sit back, whereas the people who find it hard tend to put more effort in, and along the timeline, they excel and become the supervisor in front of the person who's casually doing it because they find it easy. So everyone can do anything if they put the mind to it, really, in my opinion. You just gotta, and if you apply those ideas over time, you will get better. If you only need to aim for like 1% improvement a day, then that will compound over a year. It's how you look at it. So don't try and get stuck into the moment of what you're doing. And if you find that you're too complacent and you're kind of like, this is easy, then you're not working hard enough. You should be doing something new, which is another reason why I think, me breaking into like Houdini was one of the best ideas I ever did, because all the houses have moved over to it. So if I was still in Maya, my opportunities of work would have dried up. So be flexible and always look for the new stuff. And right now it's AI. So start looking at ways that you can leverage that. It's your friend. You don't have to match move a camera, and you can just get software to do it for you. I mean, that's like entry level stuff used to be. Then it went to India, and now the people that are going to be worried about that are the Indian teams, unfortunately. So, and that water line's coming up. So just keep an eye on it and step on the water line rather than get buried by it. So leverage it in your work. Because if you're a student, you don't know how to do something, I even got AI to write some scripting for me. I don't write scripts very much, but I got AI to write a VEX script for Houdini for me. So, that did something I didn't know how to do. So it's also a teaching tool. So yeah, leverage that and get it involved. That'd be my best advice. And if you're hungry in that, it may not come straight away. And you may do it for a year or two and nothing happens. You only need that one break and you're in there. So, but on the other side, there's more productions than there are artists, always. 2D content, especially with streaming services. I think someone put it to me, there's like 1,500 projects a year, and only enough artists for like 800. So, the work is there. I mean, it's slowly ramping up now. I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. But new technology changes everything. It can be quite disruptive. You just got to make sure you're not too blinkered, and don't get too specialized. And don't be frightened of learning stuff, really.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Ian. And
it's been a pleasure.
And hopefully we get to hear a little bit more about what you're working on through social media. I know I follow you on LinkedIn quite closely. So thank you very much again for your time. I know it is precious. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We're going to be back at 3 p.m. For our third industry talk of the day with Andy Driver, Talent Acquisition Manager at XR Games. So thanks very much everybody for joining, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye guys. Thank you.